So what if I told you that about 90% of the movements you see floating around on TikTok, especially when it comes to glute development, are probably a waste of your time. And the secret behind building massive glutes or developing your glutes at any capacity isn't going to come from doing hundreds of reps of arguably silly movements. Truth is, it's far more simple than that. The glutes are going to be split into three primary sections here. And the first one we're going to consider is going to be the glute maximus. And this primarily is going to be responsible for hip extension or extension of the hips. For example, utilizing a thrust or bridge pattern would align with the primary function of the glute maximus. The second region of the glutes that we're going to be speaking about is going to be the glute medius. And this is actually the area of the glutes that's commonly neglected. People do heavily focus on the maximus through extension-based patterns, but they tend to neglect what the glute medius does here, which is abduction at the hips. So opening the hips and moving in that abductive range of motion. For example, utilizing something like a glute med kickback is a great example of that, or even a machine abductor that many gyms do have access to. So the last segment of the glutes we're going to be talking about is going to be the glute minimus. And this shares a lot of similarities with the glute med regarding its function being internal rotation, stabilization, and even abduction too. And this is going to be heavily utilized and worked through other movements you're going to be performing, such as the abduction, such as any extension-based movement. And again, it isn't something you would directly target like you would target the maximus or the minimus. It's simply going to be something that's utilized almost as a byproduct along the way. The next thing we're probably going to have to consider when looking at effective movements is going to be external limiters. And what I mean by that is when we're looking at training a muscle group effectively, we want the point of failure to likely be that muscle group. When we're choosing effective movements, we want to make sure whatever movement we are choosing is going to be a stable movement. And again, this comes back to the element of reducing the likelihood of external limiters. We don't want the movement to fail because of a stability demand. We want it to fail because the target musculature, again in this case being the glutes, the bottom, has failed. The final point we're going to address is going to be the ability to actually progressively overload. So fundamentally, when building muscle, I previously mentioned that you want to train hard. Intensity is going to be key. And in that, it's all well and good you pushing yourself, but what actually indicates or suggests progress is being made is a concept called progressive overload, or a principle called progressive overload. This comes in two, technically actually three forms, being one, you're able to lift more weight, two, you're able to perform more reps, or three, a combination of the both. So throughout this video, I've mentioned on a few occasions that you may see a lot of influencers posting some weird and wild stuff online when it comes to growing your glutes. That's cool, that's great. But I want to put a bit of attention onto the more common movements that people often promote when it comes to glute development, and why they may not be the best movements when it comes to actually building that bottom. And some of these may actually surprise you. I'm going to list three common movements that people often promote when it comes to glute development. And I'm also going to tell you why I disagree with them. I'm also giving you three alternatives that do the job even better. The barbell back squat. Sure, the barbell back squat is a fine movement, but I've mentioned that external limiters can hinder how effective a movement is when it comes to building muscle in that area. If you're trying to grow your glutes and you're opting to do a barbell back squat, you have to consider, are your glutes going to get enough stimulus to encourage that growth you desire? Or are they going to be limited by something else? Your quads, your core, your breathing, whatever it may be. So ultimately, when we're looking at the glutes specifically here, the barbell squat probably doesn't place as much emphasis on them as you might think. And because there are so many more moving parts or potential failing parts here, you're actually reducing how effective that movement is when it comes to developing that target musculature. In this case, I'd opt for something like a hip thrust. Less moving parts means less muscles are going to be getting involved. In addition to that, because there are less muscles getting involved and less moving parts, you have less potential fatiguing points or external limiters holding back your ability to train the glutes within close proximity of failure. In this case, when you're doing a hip thrust, you're probably not going to fail because your breathing is given out, because your quads have given out, unless you're doing the movement very badly. Instead, you're probably going to fail because your glutes have failed you, and that's exactly what you want. And if you made it this far into the video, it's quite clear that you're interested in growing your bottom and getting a big, fat, juicy dump truck. Clearly, like myself, doesn't really exist. If that's the case, firstly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future uploads, because there's going to be a lot more educational content coming. In addition to that, link down below in the description and also in the comment section too is a link to TFNL coaching we're going to talk about. Is an interesting one because it's so close to actually being okay, but it's just missing one crucial point, and that is the cable kickback. And when I'm referring to the cable kickback, I mean the kickback that you often see around the gym or influencers doing online, in which they're kicking directly behind them in a straight line. And a really small tweak can actually turn that from being a pretty crap movement to actually one that's not bad at all. And all you have to do is, rather than kicking directly behind you, kick out at an angle, let's say 40 degrees or so. This then brings an element of abduction into the mix, which aligns with the primary function of the glute med that we previously mentioned, thus actually shifting emphasis to the target musculature, being the glute med in this case. And again, all it is that small tweak from kicking directly back to kicking slightly out to the side at, let's say, a 40-degree angle, or maybe actually replacing the movement entirely if you wish for a more stable movement, where you might be doing a machine abduction, which very much does shift a lot of emphasis onto the glute med due to the emphasis being on the function of abduction that we previously mentioned. The last movement we're going to talk about is a movement you often see floating around the TikTok world, which is going to be the rope pull through or the cable pull through. And again, people would often adopt this movement because it's kind of like a hinge pattern where a lot of the emphasis is being placed on the stretch position where the glutes are at their most lengthened range. People are very much favoring the whole concept of stretch mediated hypertrophy and how you must stretch every movement for every muscle, when we know that's not really the case. But that's a story for another day. The issue with this movement is, although the concept kind of makes sense loosely, we've mentioned previously throughout this video that to grow, you want to progressively overload. And as part of progressive overload, you're going to get stronger. And as you get stronger, you're going to lift more weight. And as you lift more weight, because you were just standing with a rope between your legs, stability is going to be greatly tested, which is something we've previously mentioned as a limiting factor earlier on in the video. So you're getting stronger and stronger and stronger, but to the point where you can't actually stay upright anymore. And in fact, the cable machine is throwing you back into the shadow realm because you cannot stabilize yourself. In what world is that an effective movement? What I'd also then do instead to make it a lot better is disregard it entirely. Throw it in the bin and replace it with something else. So rather than doing a cable or rope pull through, swap that for a barbell or dumbbell hinge pattern. For example, an RDL or even a B stance RDL. In this case, we're going to focus on the RDL being the Romanian deadlift, in which case gravity and the weight and resistance is going up and down exactly where you want it to when looking at performing the movement with the intended musculature in mind. And stability is no longer going to be a limiting factor or a concern demand, because again, you're not being tested in that capacity. You are simply moving the movement from A to B and aligning with one of the primary functions of what we're trying to achieve when looking at glute training, which is going to be extension of the hips. That simple. And again, this goes back to the point I made previously about how a lot of these movements look really cool and they look really fancy and they look really exciting, but it doesn't mean they're very good. Simple is often effective, and although it's quite boring, boring does breed results. But like with all my videos, this is simply my opinion, and you don't have to agree with it. I just appreciate hearing your opinion in the comment section below. So until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle about big juicy bottoms, and thank you for tolerating